Author and journalist Gabrielle Glaser, up next on Carpe Diem. Hello and welcome to Carpe Diem. I'm Merrill Brown, the director of the School of Communication and Media at Montclair State University. Joining me today is author and journalist Gabrielle Glaser. In her most recent book, Her Best Kept Secret, Glaser delves into the relationship of American women and their love for alcohol. Prior to Her Best Kept Secret, Glaser penned two other books, Strangers to the Tribe, Portraits of Interfaith Marriage, and The Nose, a profile of sex, beauty, and survival. She started her journalism career as a news assistant at the New York Times and moved on to work as a writer and reporter for several outlets, including the Associated Press, the Village Voice, the New York Times Magazine, and National Public Radio. Gabrielle, thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great to have you at Montclair State University.
Thank you.
So, interesting topics are your trademark, if you will. And this is a new, interesting, and controversial one. Tell us the genesis of how you got to this controversial and interesting topic.
Well, I've written about women and health for a lot of my career. The books may not make it sound like that, but I've covered health. And I started noticing something between the birth of my first child in 1992 and my third child just after 9/11 in 2001. And I got a very strange baby present. It was my third daughter, and we had all the pink ponies anybody could possibly ever need. And it was an anxious time. We lived in the New York suburbs. 9 people in our town had died in the attacks, and I got an unusual baby gift. I got a lot of wine. And I know it was a really, really terrifying time. It was right in the middle of the anthrax attacks, and I just kind of chalked it up to, oh, okay, all right, well, I guess this is what people think. This is what everybody's doing right now. But as time went on, and I started working as a reporter on the West Coast, I started noticing that women were drinking a lot everywhere. Women had been drinking a lot in New York, but they were also drinking a lot in Portland. And they were drinking at lunch, they were drinking after work, they were drinking at dinner, they were drinking by themselves, they were hiding their bottles. And I thought,
And these are working women and at-home moms?
And stay-at-home moms. And it was really kind of across the board. And I just kept it in the back of my mind. And my husband and I are journalists. We move a lot. We moved back to the New York area. We moved to Montclair, actually, in 2008. And a friend of mine who's a book editor suggested that I look at the topic in detail. And so I did.
And at a very general level, what did you find out? I know the data is intriguing, and this is not just anecdotal. You found
right. It was what I had noticed was anecdotal, but what I found was really a kind of worrisome trend. And what I found was that women are being arrested for drunk driving at a skyrocketing rate, an increase of 30% between 1998 and 2007 in the number of women who were arrested for DUIs. The number of middle-aged women, so mid-40s to mid-50s, entering alcohol treatment programs almost tripled, went from 9% to about 25% between, I think I said 1992 to 2007. And the number of women who were admitting that they binge drink regularly. So more than 4 drinks in 2 hours. And we know that that's a trend among college women. But what really was surprising to me was the number of older women. So women in their 40s, 50s, even women over 65 who said they binge drank regularly was quite striking. And the numbers were up.
And one might think that this was about class or poverty or difficult demographics, but not really. This cuts across all sorts of lines.
Well, the more education a woman has, the more likely she is to drink. So that was another surprising thing. We have always somehow associated excess amounts of alcohol with the Skid Row bums that we saw in movies in the 40s and 50s. But in fact, the more alcohol abuse among women is much more prevalent among a higher socioeconomic level.
And there are, as you put it in an interview elsewhere, different triggers for all this in terms of the emotional psyche and so forth of women versus men who consume a lot of alcohol. Describe that.
Here's what epidemiologists say. The biggest risk factor among women is is having had a college education. So if you think about it, we're right here on a campus. The activities, even though women outnumber men on college campuses today, the activities are really pretty male-dominated. Football games, keggers, frat parties, dive bars, and women start matching the men drink for drink, and they start to carry those habits with them as they go into early adulthood. They postpone child rearing or childbearing, and those habits of drinking to relax really have settled into a behavioral habit. Now, I'm not saying this is not an anti-drinking book. I enjoy alcohol and I drink regularly, and I think alcohol can be enjoyed moderately, but we have a history in this country of all or nothing. And that's what I'm hoping to help change the conversation about.
Well, let's pursue that topic a little bit. You're very upfront in interviews and in your book about your personal engagement with alcohol and personal anecdotes about college binges and so on and so forth. And that's a rather candid and unusual point of view to take. The literature isn't rich with women actually discussing their own alcohol consumption with that level of candor. Tell us more about your personal engagement, if you will.
Well, I've been really drunk in my life, enough times to count on one hand. And I was first really, nobody's ever actually asked me this question before, so I'm taken a little bit aback. But I got really drunk once in college, and that kind of, did it for me, as it does for a lot of people. Sure. And then I went to France. I studied in France. I lived with a family, and I thought, my God, these people are alcoholics. They're drinking every night. But I realized, no, this is what moderate consumption is. This is what's normal. This is what's healthy. And by the way, these folks are now well into their late 70s. They're still drinking the same amount as they were, and they're perfectly healthy. But I started kind of realizing that was the French way of looking at it, which is also the Italian way, which is also the Spanish way, which is the Mediterranean way, was really a very enjoyable and healthy way to be. But that's not what we do necessarily in this country. Alcohol consumption in Italy, France, and Spain far exceeds what we consume in this country. The recommended daily allowance or daily threshold for women in Italy and Spain, where women outlive American women by 3 or 4 years, is 3 glasses of wine a day.
This is from public health officials.
This is not just Joe at the bar.
Right.
This is public. The Italian health ministry says, okay, no more than 3 glasses a day, and we say no more. Our health officials say no more than 1 a day for a woman, no more than 2 for a man, no more than 1 for a woman. And I believe that those levels start to drive women underground. They feel that they're doing something wrong. They're drinking to relieve stress. And I want to get back to what you said about triggers. They're drinking to relieve stress, and they know that they should only be drinking a glass a day or no more than that, and so they just start hiding it. They start drinking secretively, and they start hiding it.
And what are the consequences of that? The consequences of that for treatment, the consequences of that for family life, and so forth? Well,
women are far more likely to be diagnosed as depressed and to be diagnosed as having an anxiety disorder. They're far more likely to have suffered from an eating disorder as young women, and far more likely to have been sexually abused. Those 4 factors are risk factors for developing an alcohol problem. Those are also factors, with the exception of anxiety and depression, those are hard topics. Sex abuse, sexual abuse, and eating disorders are hard to talk about. People don't want to, those are taboos. So it's easier to deal with the shame of that and the pain of that, having carried that and carrying that around with you by just drinking.
Your book not only challenges the perception of the reality of the problem, but it also really stands on its head our sense of what treatment is all about. Tell us about your work on Alcoholics Anonymous and your take on how we generally deal with these problems.
This was really surprising to me because as somebody who doesn't have an alcohol problem, there have been times in my life where I realized, gosh, I'm drinking more than I should be and it's not helping me. And I just assumed, oh, that's what people do. They go to AA and they get better, right? Everybody knows that.
That's what we all assume.
Everybody knows that. And so I started going to some meetings, actually, locally. I went to some meetings in the city. I started going to meetings in California and Oregon when I was doing reporting for the book. And I realized, first of all, this isn't very organized. I had this idea that somehow it was a kind of monolithic organization that was, I don't know, run by professional alcohol counselors or something. I really did not have an idea of how it actually worked.
As few of us do.
Correct. And it turns out to be there's no hierarchy in AA. Anybody, anywhere can start a group, and you can be sitting next to Joe, the librarian. You can be sitting next to Sally, the kindergarten teacher. You can be sitting next to Bob, a convicted sex offender who's out on parole as part of a deal for early release. And what happens, and what I found out, there's several things that I found out. Number one, if you go to Alcoholics Anonymous, if you believe you have a drinking problem, and our culture, our legal system, our medical system, our employee assistance programs encourage everybody to go to AA.
It's a cliche, right?
It's a cliche.
Right.
You have a problem, you got to give it up forever, you got to swear off booze forever, and you have to go to meetings for the rest of your life. You're an alcoholic, it's a progressive disease, and if you don't go to AA, and if you ever are tempted to drink again, you're going to end up worse than how you started off. And that's actually not true. There's not science that shows that to be true. AA was developed in 1935 by two guys who were at the very top of the social hierarchy. It was a cultural and clinical milestone for them to say, we are powerless over alcohol. But that was what we had at that time. That was the best thing. That was the best kind of a knowledge of brain chemistry that we had at the time. And yet, that system has been embraced by our culture at large, all of our institutions, and actually the science shows in rankings of effectiveness that have been done over and over and over again globally, Alcoholics Anonymous ranks at the bottom tier of effectiveness for all sorts for alcohol treatment programs.
And that's about both genders, or
That's
all
both
genders, I should
That's
say.
both genders,
Right.
but especially for women. We know that women, as I said, they have these risk factors, and they tend to drink to self-medicate. They're drinking to relieve stress. They're drinking to numb pain. They're drinking to forget. And men typically drink, their triggers are very different. We know from science, from scientific studies, that when men see an image of a drink or whatever their substance of choice is, let's say it's cocaine, let's say it's alcohol, or seeing a crowded bar, that sends the triggers in their brain. They begin to get cravings. You show those same images to women, nothing happens. You show a traffic jam, a crying baby, a piled up messy desk, that's when their triggers start lighting. And so we know that men and women are drinking for different reasons. AA tells you you're powerless over alcohol. You got to give it over to God. You have to do these steps. You have to
Swear off it.
Swear off alcohol for the rest of your life. You have to confess that you have a disease that's progressive. You have to look over and over and over your flaws. You have to make amends. You must submit your ego. And women, I argue that women are not drinking out of an excess of ego in the first place. And so in many ways, emotionally, the message of AA is actually very damaging. Now, if it works for someone, fantastic. But it really has a very, very low, from its own statistics, from AA's own numbers, of its own membership surveys, it shows a 5% success rate. And that was really surprising to me.
And that certainly stands conventional wisdom on its head.
Absolutely.
But you make particular points about what women with alcohol challenges should be doing. What's the right thing they should be doing? What are the alternative things they should be doing when they encounter a problem?
There are so many methods that are used elsewhere in the industrialized world that are shown to be far more effective. One is moderation and learning how to moderate. If you feel that your life is going out of control, your life with alcohol is going out of control, you can incorporate behavioral tools that allow you to moderate. And there's a group called Moderation Management, and it's online. There are meetings all around the country, and there is a protocol that's based in science, and frankly, that's used pretty much all over the world. It's that particular group is here, but it's based on science that's been used all over the world. One thing that Moderation Management and other organizations, there's another one called HAMS, Harm Reduction. I'm losing my memory of what it stands for, but it's a group that promotes whatever it is you want to promote, whatever it is you want to adopt for yourself, whether it's abstinence, whether it's moderation. It says that decision is up to you. We believe that you can find the right path for yourself. It's not a one-size-fits-all program. You have to do what AA says it does. Let's say it's you, Marianne, are a smart person. We believe you can find the tools within yourself to help wrestle this problem to the ground. You can find a way that makes it work for you. And here are some tools that can help you. One thing that both of these groups and others, there's another one called Smart Recovery, there's another one called Rational Recovery, and those groups do not use religion, as AA is also very religion-based. It's you've got to give your will over to God, and God will help you. Your higher
Who's
power
God?
will help.
Any God.
Any God.
Right.
Any God. Right. But it's a very Christian. It's quite Christian actually, because there's the Lord's Prayer is recited at every meeting, and these other groups say, you know what, we believe in you. You know yourself, and you can help find a path that works for you. One thing that I found fascinating was that some of the groups urge you to do a cost-benefit analysis. And they suggest that you swear off drinking for 30 days, which most people can do, and then maybe you reintroduce it, and you take a drinking diary. Some women I knew, I was fascinated by this. They take one glass of wine, and they write how they're supposed to sip it very slowly. They record how they feel, how the wine tastes, how their perceptions might be changing, how relaxed they might feel. Then they have a second glass, write the same thing, a third glass if that's what they're trying to find where their limit is, third glass and a fourth glass. And as one woman told me, she realized she was trading happiness for pleasure. And she had started to really drink heavily during the downturn, and it was her only method of relaxation. And she realized as she looked over her drinking diary that she really, first of all, her writing became less and less legible. She was sloppy. She was unable to actually do the things she enjoyed at night. She's a very, very busy, powerful woman. And she was unable to read at night. She sent emails she forgot. She didn't know what they said. She couldn't practice her guitar. She didn't remember what she wrote. She couldn't watch, sounds ridiculous, but she couldn't remember what she saw in Homeland. And that's serious when you can't remember what you see in Homeland.
Right.
And that gave her what she needed. It was her own kind of behavioral mechanism for saying, okay, I'm not going to have more than two. I'm frankly not functional in the way that I want to be after I have two. Now, for severely alcohol dependent people, that's probably not going to be possible. But the number of people who are severely alcohol dependent versus the number of people who are mildly abusing or using alcohol in an unhealthy way, that's a very different rubric.
So not only have you developed a rather clear point of view on the treatment circumstance, you also have a rather clear point of view on the role of alcohol in family life. Share that with us.
Well, and this is something that I just alluded to it just now. When I lived in France, this lovely couple in Paris would pour me a glass of wine. They would pour, and I was in my early 20s. They would pour me a glass of wine. They would pour a glass of wine for the wife, a glass of wine for the husband, and a little glass of wine for the son, who was 14. And as I said, I thought, oh my God, these people are alcoholic. He can't drink. He's 14. And then it dawned on me that as I watched this family enjoy itself and enjoy this beautiful thing from its culture, there was nothing wrong with this. And it really stayed with me as something that I had grown up in a culture where it was, drinking was really only for special occasions. My parents drank occasionally, but not very regularly. And drinking was certainly forbidden to me as a youngster. Interestingly, my grandfather was a Canadian bootlegger, so that's a little bit of interesting family history. And as a mother, I have 3 daughters, and as a mother, I never said, okay, alcohol is absolutely off limits to you. We would allow our girls to have a little bit of wine, to taste something. And it's an N of only 2 at this point, because one is 21 and the other one is 18, and then I've got a 12-year-old. But they never had the desire to go out and go crazy.
And yet there is a conventional wisdom that, like marijuana smoking and other things, that this leads to abuse and harder drugs and more consumption and so forth. Is there data, or do you have a point of view that challenges that as well?
I have a point of view on that. The data is mixed. And people will say, oh, well, in France, for example, there is an increase in binge drinking. Well, yes, it's true that there's an increase in binge drinking among young people, because alcohol is now being marketed to heavy alcohol, spirits and spirits are being marketed to kids all over Europe. Furthermore, and sorry to my fellow New Jerseyans, but shows like the Jersey Shore, all these reality shows where the kids are just tossing it back, that's part of global culture now. So it looks cool and it looks fun, and that's something that is spreading globally. But it is not the result of having moderate consumption. I believe it is not the result of having moderate consumption at the dinner table as a family.
So do you advocate families having sort of routine sharing of normal
Yes, I would
wine?
say that has worked for me. I think that's it normalizes it, but that's a decision for that I can't make that decision for others.
And let's come back to women again just for a second. What is your general advice, to sort of sum up the book, about people who see women with regular abusive habits and so on and so forth? Is it simply consult the family physician? Is it look for one of the groups you suggested? What should one of us do if we see issues around us?
I think alcohol is a taboo topic, and I think it is really useful and wise and compassionate to say to somebody, I'm sensing this might be a little bit of a problem for you, and there are a lot of other ways you can get better. One other thing I forgot to mention is that there's a drug called naltrexone. It's been around for decades. It was approved as an anti-relapse medication. It's an anti-craving medication by the FDA in 1994, and yet nobody hears about it. And one of the reasons why is because it's generic, so nobody's making any money off of it. Pharmaceutical companies don't have a real, there's no benefit to them to be marketing this drug, which is available very, very cheaply. It has very few side effects. As some doctors have told me, it's far safer than Lipitor. It's far safer than Advil. And what it does, it's an opioid antagonist, and it's first-line treatment in most of the Scandinavian countries. It was pioneered there by an American doctor who got fed up with trying to use his methodology here, and it's first-line treatment in Finland. You take this medication, naltrexone, an hour before you drink, and it fills your receptors, the receptors that actually allow you to produce endorphins. And with that blocked, with that ability blocked, you'll have a glass of wine, but you don't feel the euphoria, so you stop drinking. And in this culture, in our country, the medication may be prescribed, although very few people know about it, and the theory is, okay, take this medication, but don't drink. And in fact, there's a controversy about whether or not that is the right way to go about it. So
fascinating. And how's the book doing? It was came out mid-year and yet reviewed just this fall in the New York Times. It seems to have legs.
It does, actually. It was on the bestseller list last summer. It came out in July, and it was reviewed last week. And I was very delighted about that. And I'm people are interested.
Is the therapeutic community behind you?
Actually, a number of therapists have written to me. A lot of people, hundreds of people, have written to me, and a number of therapists finally said my favorite one was, "Finally, it's happening. Somebody is talking about this openly." Instead of this very punitive view, you have to stop this, you have to stop drinking for the rest of your life. We can talk about other ways of getting better. And we don't have to have this one way of, okay, this is the only way you can get better, and this is the only measure. We have lots of different measures. They use lots of different measures all over the world.
Gabrielle, great journalism, valuable to the
Thank
community. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
If you would like more information about Gabrielle Glaser, visit her website, GabrielleGlaser.com. For more about Carpe Diem, you can write to us at the email address on your screen, carpediem@mail.montclair.edu, or call us at 973-655-5158. For Carpe Diem, I'm Merrill Brown. Thanks for watching.